Okay, looks like we're going to go ahead and get started now. Does anybody have any questions on anything up to this point? We're going to start a new chapter today looking at metabolism. This ties directly into how the cells get their energy. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here then. And we call this chapter 24. This is a holdover from numerous textbooks we've used in the past. Nearly every anatomy book that's out there is going to have the metabolism, nutrition and metabolism chapter somewhere around chapter 24. So we just still always call it chapter 24 for that reason. It's really not out of our sequence. Our sequence is to do metabolic activity right after we do the cells. So anyway, so to understand this, we have to understand nutrition. We have to understand metabolism. To understand metabolism, we have to understand nutrition, the things we eat, the things that we get energy from. Because remember, the energy in our food is potential energy caused by the stored energy in the covalent electrons bonds. The molecules that make up the fats and the proteins and the carbohydrates are held together by covalent bonds. And those covalent bonds have lots of potential energy. That's the energy that we measure in the food that we eat. If we see a Snickers bar at 180 calories, that represents the potential energy in that Snickers bar from the covalent bonds of the molecules making up the carbohydrates and the fats, and even the proteins in there, because there's protein in a Snickers bar from the peanuts, for example, or a bowl of Cheerios, or an apple, or a banana, or a biscuit. All of those have potential energy in the form of calories. So the calories themselves that are in the foods, the nutrients that we eat, are neither good nor bad. They're just a representative of the stored energy that's in that food. Now we need nutrients. We need to eat things for our bodies. Some nutrients are probably more useful or more helpful than others, but a nutrient is what we need to maintain growth. And I'm not talking about changing in body stature, but cells enlarge, cells shrink. Muscle cells get bigger, muscle cells get smaller. Adipose cells get larger, adipose cells get smaller. All cells are going to undergo maintenance. All cells are going to grow or shrink or just stay the same. We're going to repair damages. We are always, a cut or a scratch, or we have to repair that. We have cells that wear out and we have to replace them. So we need nutrients for the day-to-day activities in our bodies. The nutrients fall into 6 categories. Now, 3 of them you're familiar with because they're the organic molecules, at least 3 of the organic molecules. We have carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins as 3 of the categories of nutrients. Maybe coffee too. 4th and 5th categories are vitamins and minerals. And water is the 6th nutrient. Water makes up typically about 60% of the food that we eat. And there's water in just about everything. You eat an apple or banana, a good portion of that, of the pulp of the apple or the banana is water. Water shows up in most of the foods that we're going to consume. And they add most of the weight to the food that we eat too. Not the calories, but the weight of it. Now this is what's known as the food pyramid. It's supposed to demonstrate, I say supposed to demonstrate, that the things that we should eat the most of are at the bottom of the pyramid, the whole grain foods, the whole wheat breads, rolls, vegetable oils. We should eat those. That is the best food for us to eat. Directly above that are the fruits and vegetables. We have to be careful with fruits because there, you know, there is a concern because just because it's a fruit doesn't necessarily mean it's healthier for us than something else, because fruits are very high in certain sugars. Above that, we have nuts and the legumes, the beans and the peas, and then the fish and the chicken and dairy. And somewhere in there was beef, I guess. Oh, at the very top, yes, beef and dairy products. Don't eat a lot of that stuff. Don't eat the white rice. Don't eat the white bread. Don't eat potatoes. Don't eat pasta. You know, all this stuff. The things that we like to eat are at the top of the pyramid because we're not supposed to eat them. So, but ideally, we maintain a balance of all this. None of the, there is no food that we should ever eat because it's bad for us. Anything we can eat anything we want as long as we eat it in moderation. We can overindulge on anything. A person that eats lots of apples is not going to get the nutrition they need just from eating apples. We can, as I said, we can overindulge on any food we want, and we have the consequences there. Now, okay, so the nutrients we take in, the energy stored in the covalent bonds, usually carbohydrates. Usually carbohydrates, but also in lipids and in proteins, because we can always break lipids down to glucose. We can always break proteins down to glucose. The carbohydrates are the ideal fuel for us because we're already going to get to glucose. The goal is to get glucose because we use glucose as our fuel. We always use glucose as the fuel for our bodies. Now, what do we do with that glucose? Well, glucose contains lots of stored energy. That's what sugars do. They contain lots of stored energy. We can't take that energy directly from the sugar. We have to transform it into ATP. We have to take the energy from the glucose, from the sugar, and transfer it to an ATP molecule. And then we can use the ATP, the adenosine triphosphate, as our currency, as our money. So we want to get something done, we use ATP. We want to do something else, we use ATP. We want to pump sodiums across the membrane, we use ATP. We want to use our muscles, we have to use ATP. The ATP always comes from the energy that gets released when we break sugars down. When we break the covalent bonds in sugar, we release energy. That energy will get captured. At least some of the energy will get captured by the ATP molecule. And for 7 seconds, we can use that molecule to do something. And then it's gone. And then we have to make another one and another one and another one. Fortunately, we keep making them over and over and over and over again because the ADP and the inorganic phosphate that make up ATP are never destroyed. They break apart, they come together. They break apart, they come together. The energy it takes to put ADP and the third phosphate comes from the potential energy in the covalent bonds. So that's why we need glucose, but we can't use it directly. If we use glucose directly, if we were to release all the energy in a molecule of glucose at once, we would likely explode because there's that much potential energy in there. I don't think anybody's ever exploded because we don't do it that way, but the potential is there. Now we measure calories in food as actually as kilocalories. 1,000 little calories make up a kilocalorie. But what we're reading, if it says 180 calories on a nutrition label, it's really like 180,000 little calories. Anyway, the point is, that is a measure of the available energy. There's a lot of energy stored in those covalent bonds. A calorie has been determined as the amount of energy necessary to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. There's a device known as a bomb calorimeter that you can put food specimens into, and it will actually analyze. It will oxidize. It will burn the food specimen, and it will measure the release of all the energy. So for whatever. So these numbers are not made up numbers on food items. Those are real numbers based on evaluation of numerous types of food, hundreds of different types of foods. So okay. So of the 3 major nutrients of the other organic molecules, we look at the carbohydrates first. We just talked about this in chapter 2 in chemistry, but we're going to talk about it again. We know where carbohydrates come from. Most come from plants. They come from the monosaccharides and the disaccharides. Come from fruit. They come from sugar cane. They come from sugar beets. And the only way you can tell the difference between sugar beets and sugar cane is that on the bag of sugar that you buy at Food City or Walmart or Kroger's or Ingles or anywhere else or Publix, one will say pure cane sugar on the bag and the other one will say pure sugar. It's indistinguishable between sugar cane and sugar beets. Anyway, those are all simple sugars. Monosaccharides like glucose and fructose. Disaccharides like sucrose and lactose. Honey and milk provide sugar. There is sugar in the honey produced by bees, and of course there is sugar, milk sugar, inside milk from cows. The complex sugars, starches, come from potatoes, from apples, carrots, the root vegetables, the legumes, peas and beans and stuff like that, and in all the grains, the wheat and the corn and the oat products all have carbohydrates in there, all have polysaccharides. They all, if you look at the label on a box of Cheerios, it tells you how many grams of carbohydrate are in there. It tells you how many calories that you have from the carbohydrates. It tells you the amount of sugar in there too. It's interesting that the amount of energy from a gram of carbohydrates is only 4 calories, but the amount of energy from a gram of fat is 10 calories. There's more energy stored in fat, and yet we use the carbohydrates as our primary source of energy. So the polysaccharides from plants comes in the form of starch and cellulose. Cellulose is what surrounds the cell wall, makes up the cell wall of plants. We can't digest that. That gives us our fiber that we need. So we can't process glucose, and we can't process cellulose, but we can process starch. So you eat an apple. The starch in the apple is what we would ultimately break down to glucose. You eat a banana. You eat a bowl of Cheerios. You eat a potato. All that starch that's in there is used, ultimately broken down to glucose. The cellulose is not. You eat a salad. If you eat a spinach salad, the starch that's in the spinach leaves will get energy from. The cellulose that makes up the structure of the leaf is going to pass on through. The same applies to bran, like wheat bran. The outer covering of the wheat kernel is indigestible. So if we grind up wheat, whole wheat, with the wheat kernel covering being covered by the bran on the outside of it. The bran is it's like the wrapper. We grind that up. We have whole wheat, we have starches, and we have cellulose ground together. We can eat the starch, but we can't eat the cellulose. So we get the fiber from our wheat. So ultimately, though, it comes down to glucose. Glucose is what we need for energy for all of our cells. It doesn't matter where we're getting our glucose from, whether we're eating a Snickers bar or a bowl of Cheerios. Glucose is still glucose coming from whatever food source we have. The key is how much glucose are you taking in? Just because the glucose in a Snickers bar is the same glucose that the glucose that comes from a Snickers bar is identical to the glucose that comes from an apple. Just because the glucose sugars are identical, ultimately, doesn't mean that a diet of Snickers bars is necessarily a good thing. There's always, if some is good, more is not always better. So glucose is what we use for energy, though. Glucose makes ATP. We depend on ATP for our nerve cells. We can't send nerve impulses without ATP. We need glucose for red blood cells. We need glucose to provide ATP for our muscle cells. Muscle cells can't contract without ATP. The sodium potassium pump can't pump sodiums out of a cell and potassiums back into a cell without ATP. So we absolutely have to have ATP. And even if the ATP is coming from glucose from a Snickers bar, it's still working from glucose. But I wouldn't recommend, having a diet of all these Snickers bars. So how many carbohydrates do we have to take in on a daily basis? We don't know the minimum amount. 100 grams a day seems to be the lowest amount that to keep our blood glucose up. We see somewhere in the neighborhood of about 150 grams a day is the recommended level. 150 grams a day is the recommended level. And it doesn't take much to pick up 150 grams. A bowl of Cheerios may give you 15 grams. An apple may give you 10 grams. A Snickers bar may give you 25 grams. So it doesn't take much to get to that 150 grams of carbohydrates. We do know that if we get less than 50, we start breaking down fats and then protein in our bodies. And most nutritionists will tell you that if your goal is to lose weight, the key here is to cut down on the carbohydrates. We think of fats as bad. Because we see the fat, we know what adipose cells collect. They collect lipids, fat. We see that on ourselves and on people around us. So there's this implication that all fats are bad and all fats are evil, if you will. But that's not the case. The primary driver here is an overabundance of carbohydrates that we take in our diet. If a nutritionist will recommend that if we want to lose weight, we cut the carbohydrate intake down to 75 grams a day, cut it in half, and that will enable us to lose weight if that's our goal. Because at 75 grams, you're getting enough carbohydrates to function on, and you'll also force the breakdown of some of the stored fat in the adipose tissue, and hopefully not any breakdown of proteins. The problem in many societies is that the amount of carbohydrates we take in on a daily basis is somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 grams, double the normal amount. That usually represents about half of our food energy. 300 grams represents about 1,200 calories in one day. Now, the average calorie intake for a person, a normal healthy individual who is not involved in strenuous exercise or strenuous labor, the average calorie intake a day should be about 2,000 calories. If you take in 200 calories a day instead of 100 or instead of 75, 200 grams a day of carbohydrates represents 800 calories. Remember, 1 gram of carbohydrate contains 4 calories. So there's 800. If you boost that to 300 grams a day, you're taking in 1,200 calories. Your overall calorie budget for the day should stay at 2,000. And you're already blowing through that at with your carbohydrates at 1,200. Now that's, a lot of your patients in healthcare are going to be in that situation. And why? Because carbohydrates are tasty. They taste good. Who doesn't like a donut or a bagel or a muffin or a biscuit, or an apple or a banana, or a Snickers bar, for example. Collectively, we as a society take in, sometimes more than 3 times as many carbohydrates as we should. Okay. The best carbohydrates, of course, are the complex carbohydrates. These are the good carbohydrates. You hear about the empty calories in certain foods, and those are the calories that we burn through quickly. If you have a glazed donut, you were coming to school. If you were back in the day when we were on campus, and Krispy Kreme had the light on and you couldn't resist because it smelled so good. So you drove in and got some donuts and ate them on the way to school. That's fine. The calories you get from the Krispy Kreme donut, which essentially is fried dough, and dough is always better when it's fried. Fried dough covered with a glaze of liquid sugar, which then forms the glazing on there that loaded up with sugar. It makes it very tasty. We all know that. And there's nothing wrong with a donut or two. But it comes down to how many donuts a day do you eat? How often do you eat donuts? Do you eat a half a dozen donuts a day? Do you eat donuts every day? Well, now maybe there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe that's your one reward for the day. You start the day with a Krispy Kreme donut, and then the rest of the day you're going to eat, spinach salad or something like that. Donuts are not complex carbohydrates. They are simple carbohydrates. They're mostly going to be sucrose with a little of the little starch in there. The complex carbs are the breads, the cereals, crackers, flour. Nobody eats flour, but we eat flour within stuff. The pastas like spaghetti, nuts. Nuts are full of complex carbs, as well as rice and potatoes. These are the carbs that it takes a while to break down. When you eat a potato, you're getting the starch in the potato. That is a complex carb, and we have to spend energy to break that down to glucose. And so that makes it a better type of carbohydrate to eat than one that goes straight to glucose, like a glazed donut, for example, or the sugar in a Snickers bar, because we count those as empty calories because there's nothing else with them. The starchy foods that we're eating, foods that are complex, loaded up with vitamins and minerals. There's lots of minerals in a baked potato. Different elements are in there, in the potato, in the skin, in fact, of the potato. And so we, or the carrots or the beans, or in even in the pasta or the rice, all these are going to have extra nutrients to go along with them, as opposed to a processed food, which doesn't have a lot of nutrients, a lot of calories, but a lot of nutrients. Okay. Processed foods are things like Coke and Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Snickers bars, picking on Snickers bars again. The ice cream, pudding, especially the pudding in a cup. The ones that you don't have to refrigerate. Lots of chemicals in there too. Little tiny vegetables that you find in, you go to your favorite Chinese restaurant and you get, whatever, kung pao chicken, and it has little tiny vegetables in there, little tiny ears of corn. Those are also going to be high in the simple carbs. Fruit, lots of times are loaded up with simple carbs. Highly, a lot of sugar. They're not processed and they're not refined, but fruit contains lots of sugars. The longer a fruit sits, the sweeter it's going to become, because the starches inside the fruit are breaking down into the carbs. As a mushy apple, while it doesn't look very palatable, is going to be a lot sweeter tasting than one that is very crisp. The same applies to a banana. There's a constant war on the people on bananas. Do people like their bananas to be bright yellow, or do they like them to be turning brown? The ones that are, and they're soft and mushy on the inside, they're the sweeter version of the banana, because the carbohydrates in the starches of the banana have had time to break down. So you have more simple sugars in the banana when it turns brown. I'm in the bright yellow camp on that. So anyway, now refined foods also have a problem. The refined foods, the candies and the soft drinks, are what we call the empty calories. We don't get any useful calories from a Coke. Yeah, it has a bottle of Coke has 220 calories in there, or Pepsi or Mountain Dew or whatever. They all have a couple different, they all have about the same amount of calories in there, but those are they are empty calories. Yes, we process the glucose that's in there, but we don't. There's very little nutritional benefit from those calories. We end up, if we have a Coke with our meal, we're adding a couple hundred calories to that meal that are not going to be of any value to us. The more sugary foods that we eat, the more likely that we're going to be storing extra calories in our fat cells. Our cells can only take so much sugar across the membrane. There's only so much glucose that can come into a cell. The glucose, that once we reach our saturation point on glucose, then the cell starts storing it as glycogen. Excess glucose gets sent off to the liver and stores glycogen. However, before that occurs, a lot of that glucose can also, once the cell has made all the glycogen it can make within the cell, the glucose comes in, it overloads the cell makes glycogen. There's still glucose coming in that the cell can't process. The glucose is then converted to fat. It's stored in the adipose tissue. So a diet high in carbohydrates, high in starches, will lead to accumulation of lipids in the adipose cells. Adipose cells by themselves are harmless. All they are is a storage facility. Adipose cells are not the cause of weight gain. It's filling them up that is the cause of weight gain in your patients. And so a diet high in carbohydrates more than the cells can process. Remember, we only burn through 2,000 calories a day. You know, that's, you know, we're supposed to, the best estimate is that we burn through 2,000 calories a day. So to stay at a zero sum value, so that we don't have any net gain or net loss of body weight, is if we're burning 2,000 calories a day, we should take in no more than 2,000 calories a day. If we increase the calories coming in, we're going to see a weight gain. It's been determined that if we're at 2,000 calories a day and we boost that by just 100 calories, we have 100. We go from 2,000 calories a day to 2,100 calories every day for a month. It will cause a gain of 1 pound. Over the course of a year of doing that, there'll be a gain of 12 pounds. It'll be 12 pounds every year. On the other hand, if you're at 2,000 calories a day as your maintenance level, and you cut that to 1,900 calories a day, then if you do that for a month, you'll lose a pound. At the end of a year, your patient will have lost 12 pounds simply by cutting out 100 calories. Maybe that's increasing the exercise load. Maybe it's cutting out, you know, the extra Snickers bar in the afternoon. It's whatever. So the problem is that, and as we'll see, particularly in AP2, is we have an epidemic of obesity throughout the United States, particularly in the South, and Tennessee is no exception here. Diets high in carbohydrates lead to all sorts of nutritional problems. We have weight gain. Weight gain will also lead to heart disease, because the weight gain, we accumulate fat, and that in the adipose cells, we accumulate fat around our arteries, leading to heart disease. Increased levels of sugar in our blood lead to type 2 diabetes. So we, you know, and Tennessee is leading is in the top 10. Well, so is the whole Southeast. You know, the diabetes belt, the obesities belt, the obesity belt, the heart disease belt. It's all the same area throughout the Southeast because of diet. So, okay, enough of the pontificating. Now, so carbohydrates, but it doesn't mean we can't eat carbs. We eat them in moderation. The magic word here is always going to be moderation. 75 grams a day, no more than 150 grams a day. There's an awful lot of food you can eat within that 75 to 150 gram range. And that's what you impress upon your patients. That no, I'm not saying don't ever look at anything sweet again. You're telling your patient that here's what you vary your diet, eat other things. Because 150 grams of carbs a day gives you a pretty good range of what you can eat over the course of your day. So, because carbs are necessary. Carbs are necessary, just not an overabundance of carbs. Okay, what about the next one? The next one are the lipids. And this again also gets, lipids probably get more of a bad reputation than carbohydrates do. The lipids that we look at in our diet are the neutral fats, the triglycerides, and the triglycerols, for example. So we know what a triglyceride is. It is a 3-carbon alcohol glycerol with 3 fatty acid chains attached to it. And you know, it's a fatty acid chain that's nothing but about 20 or 30 carbons attached to hydrogens, and with an acid group connecting the glycerol to the carbon hydrogen chain. That is a fatty acid, and that's the other half of the triglyceride. So this is a triglyceride. This is an unsaturated fatty acid because there's a double bond down here in this third chain. So this is going to be, without knowing what it is, this triglyceride we see here is going to be liquid at room temperature. It's likely a plant oil of some type, because plant oils are unsaturated. And because with the double bond in place there, we don't get van der Waals attraction holding it into a solid. Animal fats are solid at room temperature because they are saturated. Plant fats are liquid at room temperature because they're unsaturated. When they're unsaturated, they have at least one double bond in one of the fatty acids. Gotta have fats in our bodies. Remember, a gram of fat gives you 10 calories of energy. That's more than twice what you get from a gram of carbohydrates. We've got to have fats. We've got to have lipids. When I say fats, I mean lipids. We have vitamins that are fat soluble. The vitamin E, vitamin K, and vitamin A, these are all fat soluble vitamins. Muscle cells and liver cells use lipids for energy. Phospholipids make up the cell membranes, and we have a structure known as myelin, which is the insulator around our axons and our nerves. We insulate those axons because our bodies use insulated axons to send nerve impulses at great speeds. An axon, the axon is the extension from a nerve cell. And the axons can be 3 or 4 feet long. The sciatic nerve axons run from our hip to our big toe, and they're about 4 feet long. They are insulated with something known as myelin, which is a fat, and they have speeds of 300 miles an hour. Nerve impulses travel in the sciatic nerve at 300 miles an hour. And that, and it's only going 3 or 4 feet. So to us, it's instantaneous because we can't comprehend 300 miles an hour. We also use lipids to make cholesterol. Cholesterol is the reinforcing material in our cell membranes. Cholesterol is what we use to make all of the steroid hormones, the sex hormones, plus the hormones from our adrenal cortex, the outer layer of our adrenal glands. So all of the steroid-based hormones, including the sex hormones, are going to be made from cholesterol. We have to have cholesterol in our diet. If we were to stop consuming anything with cholesterol, we would very soon run into trouble because we would have a hard time making the steroid hormones we need, building the reinforcing material in the cell membranes. So there's lots of reasons to have cholesterol available to us. Again, it isn't, it is not the saying, if some is good, more is better. If some is good, we don't want to go to more. We want to take in what we need, but not excessively. Moderation is always the key here. So how much should we take in? How much should we tell our patients to take in? Well, a typical calorie intake is 2,000 calories. We should be taking in about 30% of that. So about 600 calories a day should come from fat. So about 600, 30% of the 2,000 calories, 600 calories a day should come from the fat. However, we seem to see that 40% is the norm. So we're taking in about 800 calories a day from fat. Why do we like fat? Well, fat makes food taste better. It's more palatable. It allows food to, fat acts like a lubricant in our mouth. When we eat something, it allows the components of the food to circulate around our taste buds, and it tastes better. It tastes smoother. It tastes creamier. So we like that. We like that. we like our food to taste better. So now the saturated fats, where we have no double bonds, should be less than 10%. So of the 600 calories a day that we take in fat in a healthy diet, only 200 calories of that 600 should be from saturated fats. So we can eat saturated fats, just not a lot of it. We can have butter. We can have, dairy. We can have, foods that are, food items that are high in saturated fats, just not a lot of it every day. It doesn't mean we can't have it. It just means we have to moderate our use. How much cholesterol do we take in? About an egg. The egg yolk is about 300 milligrams. The egg yolk is, an egg a day. So, that's like 7 eggs over the course of a week. The the cholesterol has gone back and forth on values over the past 50 years. Where 50 years ago there was a sudden concern about cholesterol, and that eggs were considered to be evil, and that, if you ate an egg, it would kill you because of the cholesterol in there. And then it said, no, eggs are fine, so eat eggs, and you'll be okay. And then it went back to, well, no, let's not eat any eggs anymore. And now we go back and forth where an egg a day, an egg and a half, I don't know how you get a half an egg, an egg a day, an egg and a half a day are fine. And I think part of that comes from the fact that up until about 50 years ago, maybe, the standard breakfast in America was bacon and eggs. It's still a very popular breakfast, bacon and eggs. Yeah. And people would eat bacon and eggs every day. Well, and there was a real spike in heart disease. And it wasn't because of the bacon and eggs. It wasn't because the evening meal was usually some sort of meat and potatoes dish, usually some sort of beef type of meal. And it wasn't because lunch was usually a burger or something like that, or a couple of hot dogs. That was standard fare. Everybody seemed to think that was normal. But in the past 50 years, I'd say probably the past 50 years, people became more aware of, dietary concerns, and we got away from that. Now, because up until about 50 years ago, heart disease levels were climbing fairly well, every year. Now they've sort of leveled off. Now, and because as a nation, we're collectively trying to eat better, even though there's lots of obesity issues. So was it cholesterol that was killing people from heart disease, or was it just the overall diet? And now, is heart disease rising again because of the levels of obesity in the US, or is it the diet? Or is it a combination of both? So we know that if we maintain high levels of saturated fats in our bodies, your patients are going to have, are likely to, a patient who maintains a diet high in saturated fats is likely going to have some sort of heart disease issues, likely. Now, there's always the outlier. There's always the anomaly where, they're going to have bacon and eggs every day and they're going to live to be 102. Or they're going to have, hamburgers, fried burgers every day. They're going to maintain a high fat, high calorie diet. They're not going to be obese. They're not going to have heart disease. They're not going to have diabetes. And they're perfectly fine. And those are the outliers, because a lot of people can't eat like that and maintain their normal weight. Saturated fats cause an increase in the LDLs, what we call the bad cholesterol. The bad cholesterol, the LDLs, tend to deposit cholesterol forming plaque, or plaque formed from cholesterol. Plaque is a fatty deposit in coronary arteries. So diets high in saturated fat will usually lead to heart disease, and over time. And then we have all the other, and that's one of the consequences of, you know, uh, a diet high in saturated fats, diet high in refined sugars and carbohydrates. That's one of the consequences. Another consequence of this is hypertension, high blood pressure, as well as diabetes. So we have all sorts of things that are working against our patients here if they're going to maintain a high fat, high carbohydrate, low exercise lifestyle. Okay. Try to get the right one here. Okay, now, where do we get fat from? Both plant and animal sources. Lard, rendered animal fat, often used as shortening. It does a wonderful job as a shortening agent in pastries, pie crusts, biscuits. It works like Crisco shortening does. And there's nothing wrong with it again, the magic word is moderation. Because what does lard do? Lard causes, when it breaks down and when you're baking a biscuit, the lard breaks down and releases lots of carbon dioxide as it's decomposed by the heat. And the carbon dioxide causes the layers of the pastry to separate into light, fluffy, very thin layers. A pie crust made with shortening, vegetable shortening, or lard is going to be, fluffy, not fluffy, but like a biscuit, like a roll, but it'll be thin layers of pastry and it'll be very delicate. The same thing applies to a biscuit. A biscuit made without shortening is going to be a hockey puck. It's not going to be very palatable in here. So we get lard. Fat comes from lard. Fat comes from meat. Meat stores lipids in adipose tissue in the meat. We've all seen fatty meat. When you buy ground beef, on the label it says 75% beef, 25% fat, all the way up to 95% beef and 5% fat. We get fat from poultry. There is fat on the chicken skin, for example. We get cholesterol from the egg yolk, not from the white. We have fat in milk, and milk products, the cream in the milk, whether it's whole milk or 2% or 1%, there is fat contained in there. Milk products contain saturated fats. Butter contains saturated fats. Butter is a milk product, and butter is made up of saturated animal fats. From plants, we get fat in chocolate. We get it from the various oils. Just because it's a plant oil doesn't mean it's still not a fat, and it can cause an accumulation of calories. We have corn oil, soybean oil, cottonseed, and the olive oils. We have coconut oil. We have corn oil. I already said corn. We get oil from seeds. You can grind up seeds and extract the oil. Peanut oil in peanut butter is an example of an oil there. Now, these fats are usually all unsaturated. That means that they are, we like to think of them as good fats. But again, overindulgence in an unsaturated fat is just as bad as overindulgence, is almost as bad or just as bad as overindulgence of a saturated fat. Just because you're eating peanut butter, peanut butter, which is made of saturated fats and has peanut oil in there, and it's got protein in there. Peanut butter also has a lot of sugar in it to make it taste better. But if you eat a lot of peanut butter, you're going to pick up the oils. And of course, the organ meats, liver and kidney and brains. People eat brains, by the way, at least they used to. fried animal brains is considered a delicacy. Some people like to eat liver. Some people were forced to eat beef liver as a kid, until they found out what the liver does and said never again. Kidneys, people eat kidneys. Again, high in cholesterol. Seafood is very high in cholesterol. Shrimp, if you like shrimp, if you like crab meat, if you like crab legs, if you like lobster, all of those are high in cholesterol. Doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that how often are you going to eat shrimp or crab meat? Fish eggs are high in cholesterol. And of course, milk products are high in cholesterol, and so are meats. Does it mean you should never eat this? Of course not. It just means that how often are you going to eat them and how much do you eat it at a time? So. We know, though, that there are certain nutrients within the fats that are absolutely necessary for us. Cholesterol, we have to have cholesterol. It is the basis of making all of our lipid-soluble steroid hormones. The triglycerides and the high-density lipoproteins, like the HDLs, for example, are very important components in our body for keeping arteries clean, maintaining a high nutritional level. We have to have cholesterol again. That's in our cell membranes. It holds the cell. It helps to put things together. Cholesterol. We have all these steroid hormones that we use. It isn't just the sex hormones. We have a variety of steroid-based hormones. We regulate fluid levels in our bodies with a hormone called aldosterone. Aldosterone is a steroid hormone that determines fluid levels in our body and also helps to regulate blood pressure. We have a hormone called cortisol that works to control glucose levels. It isn't just insulin that's involved here. Cortisol helps to maintain a constant balance in our glucose levels. There are what are called the androgens. These are the non-specific sex hormones that come from the adrenal gland that run in the background that may be the trigger for puberty. So there are lots of hormones here that have a great deal to do in our bodies for normal maintenance activities. We need cholesterol to make the bile, the bile salts that our liver makes to break down fats in our diet. And so we need all this. We can't say, oh, I'll never eat cholesterol again because it's unhealthy. Well, in excessive amounts it is, but in normal amounts it's not. We see, and in our bodies, when we have fat accumulation in our adipose cells, it's what we see accumulating there is mostly triglycerides. So we always make sure we know what the triglyceride levels are in our blood. So we always look at this. So it's not like the fats are evil. Fats are not evil. It just comes down to how much we're taking in, how much are we using. We have to have some. There we go. We store our fats in our adipose tissue. We keep some in our cells, but we store it all in adipose tissue in layers around the organs. A lot of organs don't have any protection. The organs in the abdominal cavity of our bodies have no protection. So they have to wrap themselves in a layer of fat. That's the best they can get. They don't have bones around them. Even our kidneys are nestled in a cushion of fat to try and protect them from any kind of blunt force trauma. So that's the first thing we do. We keep a cushion of fat lining our abdominal cavity to try and protect our organs. We have a layer of fat around our heart, for example, as an extra protection. We insulate our bodies with fat underneath the skin because we don't want to get too hot, we don't want to get too cold. And fat, of course, is our is our great stored energy source. We can store a great deal of energy in fat. Again, 1 gram of fat contains 10 calories, whereas a gram of carbs only contains 4 calories. And yet we use the carbohydrates as our primary source of energy. Later on, if we need more energy, if we've exhausted our carbohydrates, we can convert the fats and the proteins to glucose. We use a process known as gluconeogenesis, the creation of new glucose. Genesis means creation. The creation of new glucose through gluconeogenesis. We can convert lipids, we can convert proteins into glucose to get the energy out of there. So what happens when a person eats fat? We have fat in our diet from something. The nutrition, the food industry makes a big deal about being fat-free. They remove fat from different food recipes, and they say this product is now fat-free and cholesterol-free. Well, a lot of food items were cholesterol-free to begin with. Peanut butter, for example, is often advertised as cholesterol-free. Well, it never had cholesterol in it to begin with. But we eat fat in our diet. What happens to it? Well, we break the fat down to fatty acids and what we call the monoglyceride, one fatty acid chain. So when we digest them, we break them apart. We're going to break them apart using bile salts in the small intestine. The gallbladder releases bile that's made by the liver. The gallbladder doesn't make bile. The liver makes bile, stores it temporarily in the gallbladder. Person can have their gallbladder removed and still eat fats because the liver is going to do its job and make the bile. And the bile is made from cholesterol. So we break down the fat that we eat into monoglycerides, glycerol and one fatty acid chain, and we split off the other 2 fatty acids. Then when we get them reabsorbed, so let me back up. We break down the triglyceride into the monoglyceride and the 2 fatty acid chains that were split off. This is absorbed in the small intestine, and it passes through the simple columnar cells into the lymphatic vessels that are behind the simple columnar cells. The lymphatic system is a parallel circulatory system. The lymphatic system's role is to collect interstitial fluid from outside the cells. Where did the interstitial fluid come from? It was plasma. Plasma leaks out of the blood. It becomes interstitial fluid, salt water, which surrounds the outside of all of our cells. There's a layer of interstitial fluid around all cells. That interstitial fluid is ultimately collected by this parallel circulatory system called the lymphatic system, and it collects all this water and runs it through lymph nodes to look for pathogens, and then returns it back to the plasma. Sort of like a filtering agent for the interstitial fluid here. It also collects fat. The fat that made it through that was broken up into the monoglycerides and the fatty acids The fat that makes it through the small intestine, simple columnar cells, is collected by structures of the lymphatic system and is transported that way. And so we can transport triglycerides in the lymphatic system. Now, cholesterol has to be returned. Okay, this is what do we do with it? And when it's in the lymphatic system, where's it going to go? It's going to go through the lymph nodes and it's going to return to the plasma. Now, it couldn't go into plasma directly. It has to be processed into the lymphatic system, probably because it's too big. But it can go directly from the lymphatic system back into plasma. So we carry the triglycerides around. We carry the triglycerides around. We carry cholesterol around in our lymphatic system, and then we get it back into plasma, and then we move it around, and we take it to where we need it. Now, the upside and downside is that we have two types of lipoproteins that form here. A lipoprotein is a protein combined with the fat. Now, there's two types. There's the low-density lipoprotein and the high-density lipoprotein. The LDL, the low-density lipoprotein, is what we call the bad cholesterol. The HDL is the good cholesterol. The LDL is called bad cholesterol because it transports cholesterol away from the liver and to the cells where it accumulates, particularly around blood vessels. The HDL, the good cholesterol, brings cholesterol and fats back from the cells to the liver for processing and removal. So we have the LDLs and the HDLs. The HDLs are the good cholesterol, and the LDLs are what we call the bad cholesterol. Now, the problem with accumulation of these fats, the LDLs take the fats out to the cells, and they accumulate around the cells. They accumulate particularly in blood vessels, because what our blood vessels are made of, they're made of cells too. As we bring fat to the cells, if we are bringing excessive amounts of fats to the cells, it accumulates in blood vessels. That's what we see here. This is an artery, and this is what we call known as atherosclerotic plaque accumulating here. This is what is the basis of the disease known as atherosclerosis, arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, or just plain old heart disease. We also, excessive levels of fat are going to get stored in the adipose tissue. So we have weight gain in here. So the HDLs can only do so much. If there are excessive levels of triglycerides coming into the diet, then you're going to break down as much as you can, but then you're going to start storing it. You're going to store it in the adipose cells, and you're going to see weight gain. If if your patient is consuming high levels of cholesterol, if they are on the meat and the butter and meat and bacon diet, and they are consuming fats, saturated fats at high levels. And there's nothing wrong with eating saturated fats. There's nothing wrong with eating bacon and eggs once a week, or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But if the cholesterol levels go up, it can increase the risk of stroke, because it not only narrows the arteries in the heart, it narrows the arteries in the brain, and that raises the pressure of the blood going through those arteries in the brain, and there's a greater risk of stroke then. Now, something else that can happen, and this is pretty unusual, but it does happen. There is a disease known as Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease. Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease is caused by something known as prions. A prion is not a virus, not a protein. It's sort of an indestructible structure. I guess it's more protein than anything else. But it causes a wasting away of the central nervous system. You may have heard of mad cow disease. Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease is the human version of mad cow disease. Now, mad cow is called bovine spongiform encephalitis. Bovine is cow. Spongiform encephalitis means that the brain essentially, these cavities form and the brain just sort of rots away. And your patient is aware of this the whole time it's going on. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's no treatment for it. So who gets this? People that have eaten organ meat from infected animals. Now, where do you get the infected animal? Well, if you like to eat venison, there is a real concern about the deer version of mad cow disease called chronic wasting disease. And it tends to locate itself around the central nervous system of the deer, but it can spread to any of the meats. And if an individual eats infected meat from a deer, they can develop Creutzfeldt-Jacobs. And how many people die a year from this? Well, it's about 3 people a year. So it's not like it's a major killer here, but it's something to consider. Mad cow disease in England, they had an outbreak of that about 20 years ago. They had to kill the entire population of all their cows. The only way to control it was to kill every cow in England. And there are a number of people that developed mad cow disease from eating this meat before it was caught. Because once you develop it, there is no recovery. Anyway. So what about fat substitutes? How do we avoid fats? Well, there are lots of things, fat substitutes. The food industry loves to advertise as being fat-free or reduced fat content. They like to put the green labels on a lot of their food items. Healthy, healthy choice foods, healthy meals. No fat or low fat or 0 sugars or something like that. Well, anytime you take something out, you got to replace it with something else. Now, one way to reduce fat is to simply whip it up with air. Whipped cream that shows up on the real stuff. You start with heavy cream from milk, the fat portion of milk, and then you whip it up with a little sugar in there. And you end up with a product that is very large. You whipped cream. If you ever have made whipped cream at home, my wife will take a little, like a half a cup of heavy cream and a little bit of sugar, or vanilla, maybe not even sugar. I don't even think she uses sugar in it. And she'll put it in and she'll use the mixer and she'll whip it up, and it will fluff up and fill the whole bowl with this very light, flavorful whipped cream, just like the stuff that comes out of a can, the spray can. Not at all like Cool Whip or any of the artificial whipped toppings in here. Very few calories in there because a little, you can load it up on your, on your dessert or on whatever you're eating it with, and there are very few calories in there because it's all been whipped up into this creamy froth. So that's the original fat substitute. Makes it fluffy. We add starches to food. We add gums. There are gums. Gums are like not like chewing gum, but it's a sticky material in here that gives consistency to substances. Lots of ice creams have gums in there. A lot of ice creams have something known as carrageenan, a product derived from seaweed. It's a modified type of starch. We use that to replace fat. Still has calories though in there. And just as an aside with ice cream, you know, ice cream is sold as regular ice cream or premium ice cream. And the premium ice cream is not an advertising gimmick. Premium ice cream actually refers to the amount of butter fat in the ice cream. Premium ice cream has a higher butter fat than regular ice cream. So, you know, when you go to Food City or you go to Kroger's or Walmart and they have their it says premium on the label. It has a higher butter fat content than regular ice cream. You know, the stuff that's, you know, 2 gallons of vanilla chocolate and strawberry for $1, as opposed to, you know, 3/4 of a gallon now for $5 or $6. It's a better tasting ice cream because the fat makes it more palatable, more pleasant to eat. It lubricates the food as you're eating it. So premium ice cream tastes better than regular ice cream simply because of the fat content. Now, about 20 years ago, we saw a rise, we saw the development of a synthetic fat. It was called olestrum. It was a sucrose polyester. And this was hailed as a real breakthrough in the food industry, because now we have a fat substitute that you can use to make the product fat-free and still have all the food and flavor consistencies you had before. The beauty of this was that the sucrose polyester wasn't going to be broken down. You couldn't metabolize it. It would just pass through your body. It would give you all the benefits of fat, but give you all the benefits of a fat, like cooking it in a fat or preparing it in a fat or whatever. But there would be no calories from it. It would just go straight through. Frito-Lay developed this olester product because they wanted to market all their food snacks as fat-free and still taste good. You know, so this sucrose polyester, this artificial sucrose, strung together, did a pretty good job. There were a couple things wrong with it though. It broke down at above 300 degrees, which means you couldn't cook with it at higher temperatures. You couldn't fry, French fries in it. You couldn't fry things in it because you typically fry foods at higher temperatures. It would break down above 300. That was the first problem. But it was, most snack foods are, you're not going to be frying the snack food. The second problem was that it caused significant gastric distress. In about 30% of the population, this olester product was not metabolized, since it's not designed to be metabolized. And in most of the population that ate these olester products, they were marketed under the brand name as WOW, Frito-Lay's WOW. Potato chips, corn chips, Pringles, whatever, they weren't metabolized. In most of the population, it was no problem, but in about 30% of the population, it caused severe gastric disturbances. As they say, cramping and loose stools, meaning that they would have uncontrolled explosive diarrhea. You see here, this individual here has experienced the joys of that. Uncontrolled means they have no warning, and suddenly their bowels let go. And in 30% of the population, they were having this significant problem, And someone once said, I don't know if it was on late night or something, that WOW is an appropriate name for this product because that's what someone says after it goes through them. It didn't work as well as they would have hoped. You can't sell something as fat-free. See right here in the label for potato chips, fat-free original Lay's potato chips with half the calories. Except that you can't sell something like that and have 30% of the people that are going to eat it, have this problem. It has been reduced, I think, to just a, I'm not looking for it to see if there are any WOW products still out there. Last time I looked, Food City doesn't have anything. Pringles was real big in the WOW products. And the last time I looked, Kroger's had a whole section still had a whole section of the WOW products there, mostly Pringles and some of the Frito-Lay potato chips. So Pringles is a Frito-Lay brand. So it didn't work as well as they would have liked. I haven't checked lately to see if it's still on the shelf. It may be, but it was a good idea, but it didn't pan out the way they wanted it to. So, and let's see. But it was, and nothing else has come along there since then. Now, we've seen a lot of changes over the past 20 years now. Air fryers, have eliminated the need to have some sort of frying, at least in home use. When you can use a teaspoon of oil in an air fryer, because the air fryer circulates the oil particles into microscopic size, which coats the surface of like French fries or chicken or shrimp or whatever you're frying with very tiny amounts of oil. A tablespoon of oil to cook up a huge load of fries, as opposed to having a whole pan of oil, a half a bottle of oil to fry up chicken or French fries or shrimp or whatever you're going to do. So we've sort of eliminated, at least in home use, we've eliminated the need to use a lot of oils to cook with. Now, we still see it at fast food restaurants. They still have the fry containers there. But, there are changes coming here. Maybe it isn't such a good idea to try and mess with, I shouldn't say mess with, to create a synthetic fat we can cook with. It hasn't, nothing has come down, has shown up since the Alestra disaster occurred. Okay. And the last section on the major nutrients are the proteins. I'll just say a few things here and then we'll call it a day. Proteins come from meat. They come from dairy. They come from fish. They come from poultry. Proteins from animal sources are considered complete proteins. Now, what is a protein made of? A protein is made up of amino acids. Proteins are made of amino acids, and a complete protein provides all 20 amino acids. So meat products, dairy products, poultry products, all of these fish products, all of these are going to have, their proteins are going to have all 20 amino acids. Plant products don't have, plant proteins don't all have the 20 amino acids. They are called incomplete proteins. Every different plant proteins contain some, but not all 20 amino acids. You can get all 20 amino acids if you combine the plant proteins together. Whereas if you eat beef or a piece of chicken or a piece of fish or dairy product, you're going to get, because they're all animal sourced, you're going to get all 20 amino acids in whatever protein you're consuming. If you're eating plant sources, plant proteins, you got to mix and match, because corn gives you some amino acids, wheat gives you some amino acids, potatoes give you some amino acids. You have to mix and match your plant protein sources to get all 20 amino acids. For example, if you combine grains and beans, grains and legumes, peas and beans, plus cereals, rice, wheat, corn, oats, the combination of beans and corn, get right to the simple one, beans and corn together gives you all 20 amino acids. Beans alone won't give you all 20. Corn alone won't give you all 20. Put them together, you'll have all 20. This is the workaround to get all 20 amino acids from incomplete proteins. So, and that's a great place to stop. I will get out of here. And we will move on then on Thursday. Next Tuesday. On Thursday, we'll continue on this. Lab this week is going to be a review of bones. And if you'll may have noticed that the bone test was pushed back till after fall break. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here, and I will see you all later on.